Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to May 6th Assessment Office Hours. Thanks for joining us. Today, we will once again be discussing the many things that are going on with assessment in Connecticut. Remote proctoring, we're going to touch on some summative assessment issues for in-person, for Smarter Balance and NGS. We're also going to include some reminders about testing students who might be special ed or EL status or 504 status. Please use the question feature of the GoToMeeting, and we'll address any questions at the end of the meeting or during the meeting using the text box. Please remember to mute your microphones and be aware that this presentation is being recorded. Also be mindful that the PowerPoint is in the handout section of this session. So there are, it's the May 6th version, obviously. Okay, so who's on the call today? I'm joined by, my name is Abe Crisp, Bureau Chief in the Assessment Office. I am joined by my colleagues, Deirdre Ducharme and Janet Stuck, who specialize in special pops and accommodations. I am also joined by Jeff Gregg. Jeff is probably on the webinar. You might not be able to see him. Also from our office on the webinar, Christy Alberino, who works on Smarter Balance and the interims, as well as Michelle Rosado, from who works primarily on Connecticut SAT School Day, and Marlene Shamroy from the Student Assessment Office. And then we're helped behind the scenes today, Matt Falconer from our communications office. Matt, thanks for joining the call. Also from Cambium, Amber Benlian, Jen Cho, and Marie Musumeci. Thanks for joining the call. Here's the contact information for Cambium, 844-202-7583. Important number you should know, as well as an email address for the Cambium help desk. None of these have changed. These things we've been publishing these for the last few weeks for the office hours. Again, this is since January, actually. Okay, so an update on testing progress. What's going on as of today? As of today, we've started 185,000 Smarter Balance tests statewide. We're moving along for NGSS about 37,000, for CTOS 231, and for CTAA 2,000, for a total of about 225,000 tests. You can see also the tests completed as well. We have a long way to go, but might be mindful there's over 4 weeks left, but also be mindful that the June 4th window is quickly approaching. So keep an eye out. At the moment, we are not planning on doing any window extensions. We are planning on closing testing on June 4th. We did an extension for our Lost Links assessment. We most likely will not be doing any extension for the NGSS Smarter, CTOS, or CTAA administrations. Remember that all the trainings can be found for office hours in the training materials under resources folder under the Connecticut Comprehensive Portal. You can see a snapshot of it here. So if you missed anything in the past, you can find all that information. This is another reminder about the importance of sort of what we've called the hierarchy of assessments. So for students who are fully in person or hybrid, students should be tested in person. For students who are fully remote that can test in person, those students should be brought and tested in person. And then our fully remote students should be tested using the remote administration procedures. And those, again, those would be only for students who cannot make it into school to test in person. And then for our alternate assessments, CTAA and CTOS, there is no remote proctoring tool for the alternate assessments, so we're recommending an in-person administration unless a trained TEA is available to administer the test in a home remote environment. And this is all reiterating some news that we've been saying for quite a long time now. Resources for our remote testing are located up under the resources tab. Nothing's changed on this. You're going to go to resources here that's tagged, and then go to the remote summative resources folder. Okay, so we wanted to highlight once again some of the important lessons learned that we've been seeing based on questions coming in, emails coming in, because some of these things still are continuing to be questioned from the districts. So some of the lessons learned we've learned over the past weeks, and really these relate in particular to remote proctoring. So first up one is cameras must remain on continuously during the entire session. If for any reason a camera is turned off, either because a technical difficulty or intentionally, testing should be paused immediately. Be mindful of the max group recommendation for remote testing. Again, this is a recommendation, so we understand if it has to be broken, but we're really trying to stick to that max 10 grouping because we're finding, and this is based on irregularities that have been reported, not only during summative, but during our interims, that groups larger than 10, it becomes a real challenge to administer or to proctor remotely. So keep those groups to 10 or less if possible. The recommended script in the TAM is available for remote proctoring. That can be followed. It's highly recommended. We've had a lot of questions about, whether or not that's necessary. Again, highly recommended that the script is followed. And then once again, be aware that for students that might need to test between locations, so in other words, between in-person and remote, smarter balance tests can be used across locations. So you can start in one location, finish in another, assuming that you note that in TIDE that you're now a remote student. However, for NGSS, it's imperative that testing be completed in the mode that it was started. So if you have to start another test in another location, you're going to have to start another test. This first, along the lines of more lessons learned, we've had the question about, can I administer students in person or remote administration? Simply put, in-person students should be administered the test in a traditional manner, and the remote test, when the flag is set, is only for students who are testing out of the classroom in a remote setting. So where the proctor and the student are in a different location. Don't forget that flag has to be set in TIDE. We're going to talk about that on the next slide, but we've been getting more questions on that. Why isn't the test available in remote? It's because that remote proctoring flag hasn't been set. For all assessments, this is both for standard and all. Please remind proctors that if students are entitled to particular accommodations or supports, they have to be noted in TIDE. We found that there's irregularities where students aren't getting the proper supports, and that causes problems because it might result in retesting. So as I mentioned on the last slide, in TIDE, make sure that students are flagged as remote testers if they are being tested remotely. For larger districts and schools with lots of remote testers, the TAM, the remote proctoring TAM, provides directions on how to upload students into the system as remote testers. So what happens? We often say there's really there's always a way to wiggle out of difficult scenarios through the appeals system, but we want you to be mindful that some of these appeals can be avoided. So far, we've processed 476 appeals to help right situations where there have been difficulties for testing. 135 of those appeals have been placed just because the summative test has accidentally been given in lieu of the practice test. So you might want to alert your colleagues in district to be aware of this, make sure the correct test is selected. And then, as I mentioned earlier in a previous slide, make sure that proper accommodations are provided. If they're in the IEP, they should be marked and TIDE. And if they're embedded, and it's necessary that students get the proper accommodations. In the event that there are issues with accommodations and you need to apply for an appeal, it's likely that you will be asked, Christy Alberino is managing all our appeals, you might be asked to provide some information as to why that irregularity happened. It's all listed here, some student demographics as well. Okay, don't forget about the connection between PSIS and our state summative assessments. PSIS coordinators should be working with testing coordinators that the data is accurate. As you all know, the data that is provided in PSIS is uploaded to TIDE every evening. So what changes in PSIS results in changes in TIDE. It's important that PSIS reg should reflect the student status at the time of the testing for the following values: the special ed status, free reduced, EL status, military, homeless, recently arrived EL, and Section 504 status. Again, that would be that we mentioned this back in our original test workshop in January. District test coordinators should be working with the PSIS coordinators in district to make sure this data is updated. And that's because on June 4th, the demographic values will be saved and the fields will be locked in PSIS on June 4th, 2021, assuming there is no extension. Again, I shouldn't even be starting that as a rumor. At this point, we are planning to close testing on June 4th. That's when this the demographic fields will be locked in the reg. And don't forget that in order to enter accommodations in TIDE, students must be identified as special ed or Section 504 in the registration module. That you will not be allowed to enter those unless the student is noted as special ed or Section 504. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Janet. Janet Stuck. Janet, are you on? You want to pick things up from here?
Sure. So as Abe mentioned, many of the appeals have been errors because districts have been submitting the summative assessment rather than the practice test, which they thought they were activating. So we wanted to share specifics about this as well. So as the proctor, you can see on this slide that there is a difference between the TA practice training site and then the test administration site. There's two different cards. So if you want to, and we strongly encourage you to have your students, particularly if they're remote, access the training, the practice site, so that they can become familiar with the tools and what's expected of them. So they would go into the practice and training site rather than the test administration site. And on the right-hand side, you can see the drop-down menu of the practice tests that are available for the students. Next slide, please. So on the student side, the student would go into the practice and training test site, and then when you get to the sign-in page, the student is going to turn off the guest user access. This allows them to practice entering their first name, no nicknames, and their student ID. Then there's a verification page. Is this you? And make sure that you're aware when your students are looking at this, that they confirm that the grade there is what you expect it to be. Because if not, that needs to be changed in the, as Abe mentioned, in the PSIS system. And then on the right-hand side, the last slide there, or last image you see is the tests available, and you'll see that they're indicated as practice tests. Next slide, please. So this is the same slide we've shown a few times in our office hours, but it's worthy of repeating. So these are the resources available to you and your teachers who will be administering the alternate assessment. There are several steps related to the alternate assessment system. Making sure your child is eligible is the first step. and that's covered in the eligibility form that must be submitted in the data entry interface. The trained teacher who has passed the required training will be able to do that. If they have not passed the required training, they will not have access to entering it in the DEI. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we are getting a lot of calls and emails about is why a teacher may not be able to access the alternate assessments for their students. There are several reasons. One is the person who is indicated as the TEA may not have passed the required training, which would allow them access. Another is that the alternate eligibility form was never submitted, or if it was submitted, and this is the majority of the calls now, it is late, meaning it wasn't submitted by February 15th. So now there's an additional step that must be taken to ensure the students and the teachers have access to the alternate assessment. And that is that the trained TEA must call the CAI help desk to request that the alternate assessment indicator be set to yes. So that's the additional step if an eligibility form is submitted late. Next slide, please. So you're probably saying, well, where is that? How do I know if it's been set up? You can look at the student profile and you'll see the alternate assessment indicator in the demographics area. And there's a radio button that should indicate yes if it was submitted on time or if the teacher called in and requested it to be set to yes. An additional way you can check is in the student participation area. You can see the alternate assessment eligibility form and the date it was submitted and by who. Next slide, please. Another piece that's related to the alternate assessment is the early stopping rule. And we've included it in this office hours because we're beginning to get these calls as well. So the early stopping rule has been established for a relatively small group of students who are not able to participate fully in the alternate assessment because they have not yet established a communication mode. So these are students who typically have the most complex needs, even compared with other students with significant cognitive disabilities. They're typically learning about cause and effect. They hopefully are using augmentative and alternative communication methods to support their expression and receptive skills. And these students are not able to use objects or textures to support their communication. So they're still learning that, and they typically have uncertain responses to sensory stimuli or engagement activities. So the IEPs of these students typically focus on their medical or functional needs. So the trained TEA would follow this flow sheet if in fact their student is this type of student and has uncertain responses or inconsistent responses. So they can't observe their communication. They would administer, for example, the CTAA, and if they're finding the student is not responsive and they can't communicate their response, they would administer the first 4 items of the CTAA, and if that is established that the student is not responding, then they would also administer the math in a similar manner. And at item 4, in both ELA or math, whichever you do first, and then second, you would leave the test in pause. That's a critical piece. Make sure you leave the test in pause and call our office. Either Deidre or myself would walk through the next steps in this process, which include gathering some information about the student and whether they would qualify for the early stopping rule. If your student is in grades 5, 8, or 11, then you would administer the first activity in the CTOS as well. And just so you know, we often find that students have a different type of response for the CTOS. You may have students who qualify for the early stopping rule for the CTAA and in ELA and math, and yet they're able to engage in the science activities because it's a different test format and it's much more hands-on. So you may have a student who doesn't qualify for ESR for science, but you need to administer it. And again, if the student is non-responsive, you would indicate NR for the science assessment and give us a call and we'll talk about the next steps. Next slide. So again, we wanted to share with you where to access the information related to special populations. So again, it's in the CSDE portal, and you can go to the resources tab and the drop-down menu. And generally, the first 3 items there have many of the resources that we provide related to special populations. And I think the next slide is about questions.
Okay, thanks, Janet.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the part of the office hours, if you haven't been to yet, where we take your questions that have come in. Often this is the most interesting part of the office hours. So I'll address them right here. Some of them are good ones. And please, if you have any questions in relation to any of these items, please drop them in. We try to take every single one of them on air here. So we'll do our best between the CSDE team and the Cambium team to answer them. So first question is, when student results are reported, will information be provided that indicates if students tested remotely or in person? So at the moment, and again, this is a reporting question, so some of these answers are still being worked out. I mean, this is a different year where the normal set of circumstances are not going to be followed. So as I've said, if you've attended previous workshops with office hours, we've been saying that reporting is going to look a lot different this year. But in terms of the flag indicator for remote and not remote, we will likely have something available in EdSite at some point down the road. So you will be able to see, okay, Janet is a in-person student, Abe is a remote student. And again, that would be most likely through the EdSite secure system, not using the centralized reporting system for Cambium at this point. And again, more information about reporting in general will be coming. We recognize this year, if there ever is a year to be very cautious and careful about what we report. As you know, we've received the waiver. Accountability reporting is going away. We will be reporting, however, we will be reporting test results, but it's not going to be through the standard well, let's push everything up to EdSite Public and EdSite Secure. It's going to be different. Probably over answered that question, but hopefully you find some of that information helpful. Okay, so next question, I'm going to try to paraphrase this a little bit here. Basically, users experiencing some errors in terms of the remote administration, and when the remote, so for instance, what's being like the errors, the SAD cloud feature that's been what's been called. What happens when those cases occur? First off is if there is an instance where there is a technical issue, testing should be paused immediately. So for instance, the camera goes down, as we said earlier, due to the fact for security and monitoring, testing should be paused. Then a call to the help desk, 844-202-7583 to report, as well as to troubleshoot the instance. We are aware that there have been some instances where remote testing has gotten hung up, and you know we've been working with Cambium on that. A lot of it comes back to the simple connectivity issues. So, but please, contact the help desk. That's the best place to flow your concerns to. I'm sorry to the question here, because I'm really paraphrasing it. It was much more eloquently put, but okay. Hold on, let me just catch up here. Another question about while using the remote proctoring tool, the SAT Cloud or Hourglass keeps on appearing for students. Some days are okay, but today we had issues. Again, please contact the help desk in those instances. Janet or Deirdre, I don't know if you're taking a look at these questions. I'm gonna, just so you know, it's a text to speech question. Can you, if I read it, can you handle this one?
Sure.
Okay, so I think you guys got this easy, but I'll direct this to you. If I didn't submit the form for text to speech for ELA passages yet, but the accommodation is checked and tied for the student, will the text to speech, will the text to speech for passages work? If not, can I still submit the form online? Can you help with that one, Dee?
Yeah, absolutely. So the decision guidelines is a way that your teachers can screen student eligibility and determine that the embedded text-to-speech is appropriate for students who are considered with this designated support or accommodation. Rather, it's not a designated support, sorry. For students who are eligible, potentially eligible for the text-to-speech of ELA passages. So the actual decision guideline form is to be reviewed and completed by the teacher, and if it's determined that it's appropriate for the student, your teacher or administrator will submit it to our office just to provide us with the characteristics of your student who will be using the text-to-speech. So to answer your question, the critical task is to ensure that the text-to-speech is activated in TIDE. And if you haven't submitted the decision guideline form, please do that as soon as possible. We would request that all forms be submitted no later than June 4th. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. There's a question that came in regarding simplified test directions. To be honest with you, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. So if you could email the CT student assessment at ct.gov inbox, I'd be happy to help you, but I'm not sure I understand that question, so I'm gonna hold off answering that one. So that's it for questions. I'm gonna give it, usually there's a flurry at the end here, so I will give my wait time, and if you have more questions, please type them in, and we will address them. And they're coming in here. So, okay, so if a student starts the NGSS tests remote, then is updated to in-person in TIDE while the student is testing, is an appeal needed to remove that test was started in error? So if a student starts, okay, so I see an error, a student begins testing with a remote administration, then there's a notice that says, oops, that was not to be done. Should you, and so then you administer it in person, do you need to administer an appeal? Ultimately, what's going to happen is we're going to take the completed test in that situation. So we would take the in-person completed test first. It wouldn't hurt to, you could certainly submit that as an invalidation just to make sure that record is dispensed, but it's not absolutely necessary because we're gonna take the completed test in that instance. Jen, do you wanna, I don't mean to put you on the spot on this one, but do you have any advice to that? Would that be a proper way to handle that?
Yeah, that's what I would. So if you're going to abandon the remote test because it's not the test that the student should have taken, I would definitely go ahead and validate that one. So and the student will just take the in-class test. We'll also do some analysis to see how many students have started both tests and make the determination as to which one will count. It's like Abe said, the completed test will be the one that's the test of record. But if you already know that there's a test that should not count, go ahead and invalidate it.
Okay. We'll wait a minute or two more for any questions. Jen, thank you. While we're waiting, we'll get just a little information, a bonus information about, we have finished our loss testing, as I mentioned, at the end of April, and we're already looking at our data, and the participation rate has been great. We appreciate all the district's efforts to complete testing. I know Janet, our Loss Links program manager, is terrifically appreciative of that, and just a little update on that. We're already looking at that data, and it's looking great. So thank you for your efforts for that. Okay, I'll give another minute or two more. Okay. Looks like we've answered all the questions. Once again, we appreciate you attending. We appreciate some kind words coming in now. We know you all are busy with your schedules, so thank you for taking the time to stop in for office hours. These will continue until June 3rd, likely. Thank you to my colleagues at CSDE, Janet and Deirdre and Matt behind the scenes, and thank you also to our CAI colleagues, Jen, Amber, and Marie. Have a safe afternoon, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.
I thank you, everyone. Take care.